Good morning. I'm Pat Thurston, and I am thrilled and not a little bit shocked that Russ Baker has continued to stay with us through the entire program this morning. Russ Baker is the author of Family of Secrets, The Bush Dynasty, America's Invisible Government, and the Hidden History of the Last 50 Years. For those of you who were not with us at the beginning, let me just tell you a little bit about Russ. He's an award-winning investigative reporter. He has a track record for making sense of complex and little understood matters. Certainly he's done that in Family of Secrets. He's written for The New Yorker, Vanity Fair, The Nation, The New York Times, The Washington Post, The Village Voice, and Esquire. He also served as a contributing editor to the Columbia Journalism Review. He received a 2005 Deadline Club Award for his exclusive reporting on George W. Bush's military record, and he is the founder of Who, What, Why, the Real News Project, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit investigative news organization. It operates online at whowhatwhy.com. And I just went there tonight. I was not familiar with it until I knew you were coming on the air, and it's a terrific site you've got there.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think everybody should put that in their list. If you don't have it as your homepage, at least make sure it's one that you check on a daily basis. It's got some great information. I can't wait to get further into it. We've got, as you can see, lots of people calling in, but we have not yet gone into George W. Bush. And that's kind of where this started. You know, the whole idea of Family of Secrets, at least from my perspective, as you're considering how this guy got into office. It's kind of an improbable thing. And what happened during his presidency. Yeah. So Poppy became vice president under Reagan. We tell, by the way, that the Reagans didn't really like the Bushes.
They did not like the Bushes. Ronald Reagan didn't want Poppy to be his vice president. That's an interesting story, by the way, what really happened there and whether leverage was applied to Reagan to make him do that. He didn't have to put him on the ticket. The idea that he was somehow balancing the ticket or giving it added credibility or something, I find that very dubious because there were many other people they could have chosen. But they put him on the ticket, and that whole trajectory is very, very interesting. And of course, George W. Bush would never have been president of the United States if his father had not been president.
Right.
I mean,
and George Herbert Walker Bush wouldn't have been president probably without having been Reagan's vice president, would he?
That's right. That's right.
So why did they? Was it just pressure that was put on the Reagans?
Well, I don't know that for sure, but I think this is again about these interests we're talking about, these intelligence and these military interests, these factions, you might say, applying pressure
and
to
don't
him.
Forget the corporate link in there, the big business link to all of that.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And of course, Reagan was backed. He was backed by other, wealthy interests, but a lot of them, you may remember, one of them is Holmes Tuttle, these big, car dealers and so on from California. They were not really part of that establishment, that kind of Eastern financial intelligence industrial establishment. They were sort of independent, wealthy people were the ones who were behind Reagan pretty much in the primaries.
So, so then Poppy became president.
Right.
And had his war.
Right.
Why?
2 wars, actually. Also Panama, Panama, and the Gulf War.
It was. Oh, that's right. I forgot about Panama.
By the way, I mean, one of the things we should talk about at some point is what I learned about the real reason that George W. Bush went into Iraq.
Okay, well let's skip right to that. I mean, we don't have a lot of time here. Let's move to George W. Bush because he's fascinating and frightening at the same time.
Well, one of the things I discovered that was much like his father, George W. Bush had a secret life, and he is not quite the sort of numbskull he's portrayed as. He's actually a man of slightly above average intelligence. He's very wily, and he's very in control of what he wants to do. He has been throughout his life. And what they did basically was they had to kind of create a sort of a managed image of him in order to elect him as president. I have come to believe that the reason they did this were two. Number one, he had gone AWOL from the military during the Vietnam War, and there was no way of surviving that. Had that come out, he would have, of course, been ruined, and his father probably would have been ruined. And so they could not let that come out. So that was their big secret. The other secret really was just the fact that he was so unaccomplished. And so they were able to distract attention with talking about him being a partier and so on. See, that didn't hurt him politically. That helped him politically because
everyone could relate.
Right. People like somebody. Remember what they liked about Bill Clinton was that he played the saxophone and he ate Big Macs.
Right.
This is where the spinmeisters want that stuff out there. The people they don't like are the John Kerrys who they imagine munching on canapes and and sailing, elite sorts of things. As long as it's drinking beer and all this kind of stuff, it's all okay. And so they weren't worried about this. So I came to the conclusion after interviewing more than 500 people and all the other work that I did for Family of Secrets that Karl Rove and these other people were spending these years very carefully constructing this sort of false persona. Now, one of the things they did was very interesting. You know about the religious conversion.
Yeah.
Well, the fact is, in the year 2000, if Bush won that election at all, and of course some people don't believe he did, he would have lost it by a very lopsided margin had he not had the vote of tens and tens of millions of people who consider themselves evangelical or fundamentalist Christians, and they voted almost as a bloc for George W. Bush. They didn't always do that. They voted for Jimmy Carter, a Democrat, who was a devout, born-again Christian. But in the case of George W. Bush, here was a fellow who had no track record of being religious, and suddenly they present him as this born-again. And I went back to look at that, and of course, you don't want to question whether somebody is serious when they say they profess religious beliefs, but the fact of the matter was, it was so out of character for him. And I went back and I looked at it, and I actually we have an entire chapter of Family of Secrets. I interviewed a man named Doug Weed, and he was a Pentecostal minister, and he also was an advisor to politicians on how you get that vote. And he actually had written memos to George H.W. Bush telling him, Mr. Vice President, if you want to be president, you have got to get religion.
Right.
Now, H.W. had trouble. He was like, gee, I don't know if I can pull this off. But those memos, Doug Weed realized in retrospect that H.W. was showing it to his advisors. Well, one of his top advisors, people don't know this, was George W. Bush.
Right.
He was very, very savvy, and he's showing him these things. And George W. is thinking, boy, I want to run for office. And so what does he do? The year after this memo, he starts attending these Bible study things, and he's not very serious about it because we know they say something about what is a prophet, and he says it has to do with a profit and loss statement. He's clowning around. He's not into that stuff, but he's able to adopt this thing. He's also but you know what they needed? They needed a tabula rasa. They needed a clean slate for him so that nobody would look at his life prior to the mid-'80s when he goes through this purported conversion. So he does two things. He claims that he's born again, and he suddenly stops drinking. And after that, he's this fellow who very devout people can really look up to, and they love him more than a guy like a Dukakis or Kerry or something who never had to go through something like that. They don't like them; they like him because he was a sinner, and it was a story of repentance. You see, and this was very, very appealing.
But was it fake? I mean, we've read about Rummy, for example, Donald Rumsfeld, and some of the memos that he sent to George about Iraq, which had these Bible quotations, these scary things on the top of them, as if that was trying to work on his devout evangelicalism.
Well, you have
evangelism, whatever.
You have to understand that if we know about those documents, that's because those things were leaked. They do very calculated leaks. They put things. This is also a CIA technique. You put things into documents aren't real. Documents are for the purpose of propaganda. So you want to get something. By the way, in Family Secrets, I actually interview somebody who tells me that George Bush told him how you leak these things. And he says the media is dumb as all get out. And what you do is when you've got something you want to get out there, what you do is you pretend to hide it. And what you pretend to hide it, and you kind of say to people like, oh, by the way, don't talk to anybody about this, because you can be sure that there's some ambitious person on the staff who wants clout with the media, and they're going to leak it. He calls it burying it.